morning, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning talking about something that's important that isn't current politics. The only silver lining I've found from the Brexit episode is that now I'm a called upon expert within the company for dealing with shocking, surprising, and in most cases, unwelcome election results. Thinking about what I want to talk about today, I thought the important thing would be to reflect on some of the learnings that we have had as a company. As Paul said, I think we're a company that very publicly has faced an enormous amount of scrutiny for what we've done in relation to our compliance model and the way that, in particular, we've rolled out privacy policy updates over time. I want to share some of that learning with you because I think it's particularly timely right now, as actually our first speaker said, as more and more of the devices that we use start to become devices that are in some way connected with the use of personal data. So in other words, the need for a broader range of products and services to think about their privacy policies, think about how they're going to explain to the people using that service their use of data. That's important. And then also in the context of the general data protection regulation, which I'm sure there are large numbers of people in this room right now who are spending time figuring out what updates, if any, they need to make to their policies in the context of the new regulation. So I wanted to, in particular, think about whether the regulations that we have and the ways in which we comply with them help people in the way in which they're intended, particularly looking at that specific example. In the EU, we've defined privacy as a fundamental right, and we've also, in the European Convention on Human Rights, articulated a view that privacy again, is a core human right. But this does need translating into practical regulation. So we have the core right, but there's practical regulation that's given effect previously through currently through the Data Protection Directive as transposed into national law and soon through the Data Protection Regulation. And when we translate that fundamental right into a regulatory framework, we need to do it in a way where it doesn't cause paralysis. There is no intention, I think, when you define something as a fundamental right, for it to prevent all kinds of activity that are actually in the public interest, in the interest of people. Rather, it's intended to create a framework within which those activities can take place, but at the same time respecting that core right. I spent some time, some years ago, as a legislator in the UK Parliament, and one thing stuck out for me was when we modified our law on communications. So communications are not a fundamental right in European Union law, but we needed to give effect to the regulation of the telecom sector. And we debated for a long time how we should call the people whose interests we were regulating for. And there was a debate between calling them citizens and calling them consumers. Quite a philosophical debate as to whether or not that would change the way in which you gave effect to the regulation. And in the end, we compromised by calling them citizen consumers, so classic political compromise, so they're citizen consumers in the regulation. But I actually find that quite a nice phrasing when we think about regulating businesses in the context of some of these core rights. We have interests as a consumer, and we shouldn't forget those. The interests as a consumer primarily are that service that we like and want to use is able to be delivered to us. But we also have broader interests as citizens. There is a sense in which rights like the right to privacy have a broader societal impact than simply the right of me as the individual user of a consumer. So thinking of people as citizen consumers and then thinking about how we can give effect to those, I would say, complementary interests through regulation brings us to look again at saying, does a privacy policy, does the way in which a service interact with its citizens, consumers, accurately capture their interests and develop their interests? One of the other core values that we have at Facebook is that we like to think we're a learning culture. So the classic thing that we do is we do something, it doesn't go the way that we expected, we learn from that, and we don't repeat the mistake. But after 7 years at the company and having issued multiple privacy policy updates for multiple products, I can't yet say that we've got to the stage where we can now launch a privacy policy update and nothing will happen. It'll be simply a sort of routine business. There's clearly some challenges still around that. We've tried many things, and again, I'm sure there are people here in the room who have been through these exercises. We tried briefing regulators. We've tried going out to different expert groups. We've tried a whole bunch of different things to try and help people understand what it is that we're doing. We've thought very carefully about design. We've thought very carefully about opt-in, opt-out options. We've worked through all of that. And yet we still seem to find ourselves in a repeated cycle where, as we update the product and update the service, we are causing unhappiness, and that unhappiness gives us no pleasure whatsoever. And I don't mean this as a way of complaint or a way of whinge. I mean this genuinely as this is a challenge. We're going through this repeated cycle, and huge amounts of effort of very serious and well-intentioned privacy professionals on our side, and well-intentioned and serious privacy professionals out there in the regulatory world. A huge amount of that resource is being taken up, in many cases over many, many months, in trying to unpick what happened when we've launched a policy update. And that feels to us not the most productive use of resources. So if there are ways in which we can get past that, then we would like to do so. And that's one of the themes that we want to explore, actually, again, with people in this broader community rather than just those who exist within the company. So thinking about why we do these updates, I think there are really three core drivers. One is technology. And again, in the opening talk, we talked about the evolution of technology. Just to give you a classic example, if you, as we did, operate a traditional website, a website has, or traditionally the websites had very little notion of location. They're not location-based services. They're services used from a static point. When you take that service and move it onto mobile and it starts to become predominantly used on mobile platforms, all of a sudden you've unlocked a whole range of location-based services. There's no reason why consumers shouldn't have them. They're very consumer-friendly. But clearly, as a service, you have now extended your service from a static service to a location-based service, and you do need to go explain that to people, explain why you're doing it, explain that you will now be capturing location data and using it in certain ways. And frankly, if you make those kind of large technology transitions, you can't say to people, I want the version without location, because the service as a whole has been updated. It is now using location. In many ways, it would be inaccurate to say to people, well, our service now uses location, but your particular use of it will not involve location. The technology has moved on. It is now a feature, a facet of that service. So there are technology changes like that where the platform has evolved and now offers something different, and the policies must reflect that difference. The second driver are business drivers. And again, the most recent update that we're talking about, the WhatsApp privacy policy update that's made a few headlines, is very much about a business update. And again, these are quite normal. As businesses evolve, there's no fundamental reason why a business should not be able to evolve its business model. And equally, there's no reason why businesses shouldn't be able to change their structural configuration because of normal business drivers, and that can be entirely in the consumer interest that one should do that. You're able to offer better, more enhanced services. That's why these structures change over time and why business models change over time. Again, some people will object to the evolution of the business model, but I don't think there's any core in principle reason why that can't happen. But when it does, you need to be transparent and explain to people that the business model has changed. And then I think the last core driver is regulation. As I said, something like the General Data Protection Regulation coming into force will require everyone to look at their policies. But there's also a lot of specific changes. And again, one of the ironies from where we sit, I again intend as an observation, not a complaint, but one of the ironies is that the outcome of a regulatory action very typically is a requirement to put more language into your privacy policy. Often at the same time as being criticized for having too long a privacy policy, you will get a requirement to say, in sections 3, 5, and 6, there's insufficient information, it's not clear, therefore I'm asking you, or requiring you in some form, to add additional language into your policy, and clearly you then need to go and do an update. So again, from sitting inside a company perspective, you have a queue of changes that are being made. The technology is evolving, the business models may be evolving, and you've had a series of interactions with regulators who have told you that you must make changes in order to reflect concerns they have about inadequate or inappropriate language in the policy. So those things queue up, and at a certain point after that gestation, you're ready to go and you launch the privacy policy update. Those drivers, I think, are all perfectly natural and perfectly normal. And indeed, I think one of the concerns we have is that because of the climate that we've created where these updates are difficult to do, I suspect there are people sitting there who really should be making updates, but prefer not to do so, or they will leave it as long as they can in order not to get into one of the kind of cycles that we've been involved in. So those requirements are there. We do need to figure out how to update them on a regular basis, but I don't think across the industry, we've figured out quite how to normalize this, how to make it so that this is a routine part of business. It's still seen as something exceptional, something surprising when, say, from our point of view, it's really quite normal. And I think part of the problem is some of the assumptions that are made about the purpose of a privacy policy. Again, I'm sure people in this room are familiar with the research done a few years ago by, I think, researchers at Carnegie Mellon, where they looked at the amount of time it would take somebody to read privacy policies for typical services they used if they did that, and it turned out to be more than 200 hours a year. So we're talking about 5 working weeks a year to read the privacy policies back then. Roll forward to 2016, and you're probably, you could spend a couple of months a year actually reading the policies of all the services that all of us typically use. So it's not going to happen. And I think we need to recognize that the privacy policy fundamentally is not a user-facing communication. It exists for them, but it is primarily a legal document that exists to underpin the service that's there in the case of dispute and as part of our conversation with regulators who quite properly want to check that we're doing things. But in the same way that if I buy a car, I don't read all the safety certification document, or indeed, if I buy a financial services product, I'm primarily going to rely on brand and trust that all the underlying compliance work has been done. I think similarly with the services that we use, that sort of formal compliance mechanism, I think people will trust that that has been done, and they're not going to engage with the detail of the document in most cases. There will be exceptions to that, but most people are not going to do that, I say, particularly as the use of the documents and the use of personal data has spread. So I think we need to think much more and focus much more on how we give people information outside of those policies. And again, that's been an evolution with us, and I think is an evolution for others as well. That while we need to get the legal documents right and do the compliance, and we have no complaint about doing the compliance, we want to take some of the energy, the drive, the expertise of our privacy professionals and direct them more towards communicating with people outside of that privacy policy so that we can help them to understand what exactly is going on under the hood, how to drive the product as much as how we did the safety compliance for the product. This may seem at the moment like a large tech company problem. I mean, most of the sort of fun and games and the attention has been on updates that have been done by companies like mine and similar companies where we've gone out to market, explained how we want to update the service, and there's been a reasonable amount of interest from regulators. But I think increasingly this is going to impact on everyone. Data using software is becoming a much broader feature of our life, and the need to update and communicate with our citizen consumers about those data using services will grow. So again, to take the car example, today you buy a car, the safety certification is done when you buy the car drives out the door. There's no need to update the safety certification policies on the car. But the car of the future, as we described, as was described earlier, is going to be a data-using car. The car of the future will have software. The software will gain in capability all of the time. And so the car, whether it's the car manufacturer, the software manufacturer, in many cases it will be the car manufacturer, will have a requirement to let the drivers of the car know how those updates have occurred. And so I think far more sectors are going to be moving into this regular update requirement, moving into a similar space to the space occupied by classic internet service companies today. And again, we can think of other aspects of our lives, like our transport, taxi services, food delivery services. You can create a huge long list of services which previously had no interaction with personal data and increasingly in the future will involve the use of that personal data, again, in the consumer interest, but there will certainly be personal data that is being used. Those services will change in terms of the technology and the technology they can offer, their capability, but they'll also change in terms of their business structures, and there will be different connections between different businesses across all aspects of your life. So this notion that we need to update policies, we need to communicate with people about what we're doing, I think is going to spread across the sector. And again, referenced it earlier, the new regulatory frameworks that are coming down the track, I think we can anticipate, in a sense, more attention and more regulation in this space, not just in the European Union, but across the world. Services are going to have to constantly be evaluating the levels of compliance with their existing policies and updating in reaction to either tweaks or full-scale rewrites of regulation, which are happening, I say, from our observation on an increasingly rapid basis across an increasingly broad range of jurisdictions. So I think we're going to have to figure out what the solutions are. It gives us no pleasure to sort of be stuck in this repeat cycle where we are trying to make sure that we're up to date, trying to make sure that we communicate effectively with people who use our services, but finding ourselves locked into cycles where we will spend months and in some cases years arguing over the legal documentation that accompanies or underpins that service. We clearly don't have the answers by our own track record, and so we're very keen to work with a much broader community. And my colleague, Stephen Debman, who many of you may know, who is one of our thought leaders on privacy globally, is working on this, trying to set up some programs and some structures where we can talk to a much broader range of people and try to look at the challenge in terms of some of the modern technology, some of the modern capability that's available to us. So that's looking at things like user interface design, to the extent to which the user interface, certainly for a software service, can communicate the core elements of data usage in a way that is better than a sort of formalistic legal document. Again, looking at presenting bite-sized pieces of information. So in many cases, there will be clauses in your document that really are quite meaningless unless until you use that aspect of the service. So again, to come back to something like location-based services, we can have 3 paragraphs that describe how we will use location data. They will sit in the document, but in many cases that's far less instructive than the point at which within the service you first access location, being provided human language information about how that location data will be used. So trying to understand how you can present information that will be there in the formal documentation in ways that are more immediately relevant to the people using the service and that will help them to understand it. So again, huge amount of work there, and certainly we would not claim any exclusivity of expertise, and I hope that there will be people, this is my advertising pitch, who are willing and able to join in those conversations, which I say Stephen Debman is going to be initiating on our behalf. So I think as we sort of watch services like ours, and again, I know there's a wide range of views about our motives, about the way in which we operate. I would say that, from my experience inside the company, we genuinely are trying to deliver services that are good for consumers, and we generally are trying to do that in a way where we deploy the latest technology, we deploy the latest features to them, but we're transparent about how we've updated our service and deploy that. But within that framework, accepting that sort of basic premise that what we're trying to do is in the interests of the people who are using the service, I hope that others will, want to join in a conversation about how we can enable that, how we can make sure that we break a cycle whereby companies are, or I think it's less about the companies, it's more about the fact that the huge amount of energy is devoted, we think, to the wrong part of this equation. The part that we should be devoting the energy to is that clear understanding between us and the people who use our services about how they work and about how the data is used. Thank you for listening to me this morning. I hope that's some food for thought. And I look forward to continuing the conversation in the context of the work that we're doing through Stephen's programs. Thank you.